Okay. Thank you. Cynthia, are you on?
Yes, she is.
Hello.
Okay.
George, I'm here.
Okay, that's great. And I think we're waiting for Peter. Is Peter on?
Oh, Peter's here on phone.
I am on, George.
Hi, Peter.
I
How
am
are
here.
you? Great.
I am well, George. Thank you.
Good. Okay, well, should we get started, folks? What do you think? Should we wait a minute?
I think we can get started, George, and other participants can join at their leisure over the next couple of minutes.
Okay, that's great.
And thank you. It appears everybody's muted, so we're good.
Okay, yeah, Cynthia, do you want me to kick it off, or how do you want to get going?
Absolutely, George.
Okay.
Marina, University of Guelph.
Join the meeting.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. Appreciate everybody joining us today. And I must say, looking at the names of people here that have joined, it's just a little bit nervous making. Actually, I've got a number of my board directors here, and people like Laurie McMullen. I see Laurie McMullen's name here on the participant list. And yeah, so there she is. So, and a number of key stakeholders that we've been working with on a number of files here over the last little while here. So by way of disclaimer here, I'm going to say that anything that's at variance from anything you've heard from us before is entirely COVID-19 related problems. Otherwise, this would be deficiencies in our work and inconsistencies. So I'm not going to go down that path. So let's get started here by turning it over to Peter McKinnon, who's going to give some introductory remarks on behalf of our board of directors, our board chair, Janet Davidson. Peter.
Thank you very much, George, and good morning or good afternoon to all, depending on where you are in this great country of ours. On behalf of Janet, our chair, and the board of directors, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us for our member meeting today, and a very special thank you for joining NDRIO as members during our inaugural year. This is a membership organization, which of course tells all of us a great deal about how we see our accountabilities and requirements for responsiveness. I'd like also, while offering words of thanks, to thank NDRIO itself, the applicant board, which began its work back in the summer of 2019 and which continued until the transfer over to the inaugural board. We've also been led by an excellent interim management team, and they deserve our thanks, yours and ours from the board, and we thank them warmly. We do want to thank our funder, obviously, the Government of Canada, for its leadership and support of a national DRI strategy. That is fundamentally important, and we are grateful to have the energy behind this now. The new Digital Research Infrastructure Organization has reached some impressive achievements in its first fiscal year, and we're pleased to share with you an update today. You can also find the details in our annual report, which is posted to the NDRIO website. The board and the leadership team are hard at work advancing the corporate plan. None of this advancement would have been possible without the contributions of the membership, the stakeholders, and the Canadian digital research infrastructure community. Your input is essential as we work toward providing you, members, and the broader research community with the digital tools and services they need to conduct leading-edge research and scientific breakthrough. So our mandate is an ambitious one, and you as our members are absolutely critical. And I really want to underscore that, absolutely critical to our planning and priority setting. Your contributions today and into the future will help define a new path for digital research infrastructure in Canada, which is all about helping researchers do what they do best to the benefit of all Canadians. So we look forward to continuing to work with you in the months and years ahead George, thank you, and back over to you to walk us through the update. Thank you all.
Great. Thanks very much, Peter. So we're going to cover a number of different things here today, and really what we want to do is update the membership, our members, on range of activities, some developments on our timelines and our critical path. But I think most importantly here is to open up a discussion with you around the value of membership in the organization, what your expectations are of Endrio moving forward here. So there's part of this agenda today that's really focused on that. Once I get through my update, I'll turn it over to Cynthia, and she can walk through some of that and hopefully get a little bit of feedback. Now, we do recognize this is sort of the first time you've seen some of this material. So this is really, that particular part of this is really a setup for a longer term discussion we want to have with you around membership and Endrio, and as I said, to get your feedback on what you'd like to see out of us going forward. Again, I'm going to apologize to anybody on this call who has heard some of this update before. We've been fairly active with different groups, updating people, and as recently as yesterday with some of the representatives of host sites across the country here. So again, I apologize if some of this is repetitive to some of you. And as I said, variances from any information you've heard from us before is not our fault. It relates to the international virus. So just by way of sort of reiterating some of the basics of Endrio here, just so as a reminder to anybody that hasn't been following this closely, because I know that in the post-secondary world there's been a lot on the plate over the summer months. So this may not be at the center of your desk for many of you. So just a reminder here that what we're dealing with here is really part of a larger commitment that the federal government made, through ISED made. I think it was budget 2018, if I'm not mistaken, where they set aside $572 million over 5 years towards a national digital research infrastructure strategy. 375 of that over 5 years was dedicated to the setup and operation of a new organization, Endrio as we're calling it. And the decision to fund that really came about as a result of many years of hard work by some visionary people. Some of them are on the call here today to really make the case for a new platform for support for researchers across the country, and trying to drive a more stable model, and a model with more equity, more access, and basically better tools and services for researchers. So a lot of work went into the vision for setup of this, and that hard work culminated in this $375 million to the new organization. So again, this is all background. Many of you will have heard this before. Really, what Endrio will be responsible for is funding and strategic directions for all the tools and services and activities for advanced research computing, data management, research software, and cybersecurity within the DRI ecosystem. And we will share that space with Canary. Canary will still have a very prominent leadership role on the digital network for research and education. So they're their core mandate they've been operating with for many years. So there'll be two players in this ecosystem that will have funding and strategy roles respectively. Okay, so that's again, just a reiteration of the bigger purpose and background that we have here. I want to just, this slide is a little bit conceptual and perhaps a little hard to follow, but I just want to, as we get into this update here, just to remind everybody here that there is a number of phases to the work of Endrio, to the work that this organization is tackling, complex set of deliverables and work plans. But there are phases to this work, and we're very much thinking about sort of a continuum, a connection between concept, the build out of the various elements of Endrio. You need to put that into operational transition mode, and to get those plans that are being developed to that vision operationalized and in place. and then in a mature state to have Endrio guided by a strategic plan that the community, all of you as members in the community, have part in developing. So I think this is, for me, it's always is always important just to remember that there is a journey here, a multi-year journey for this organization. We have fellow travelers in Compute Canada and Canary along the way here, but we're very much in that build-out phase right now where we're guiding our work by a work plan and a strategic framework. So let's get into a little bit of, the work streams or the activities for 2021 for this fiscal year. And some of you may have heard this before because we talked a little bit about this, I think, at our AGM, our first general meeting in Ottawa in March. But if you take a look at sort of all of the activities we've got leading up to the development of a strategic plan and implementation of a mature Endrio, you can characterize them in a number of different streams. So first of all, building the organization. So we have we've done a lot of work on this to date in interim mode, but there is a job of work to build Endrio as a corporation and as a functioning entity, including setting up our governance, our organizational structure, and our HR plan. So, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but, we have a functioning board now. We have our committee structures. We have many of our governing policies in place. We are early days in thinking about organizational structure and positioning some thoughts for an incoming CEO in that regard, and also in the development of an HR plan to support that. A foundational piece of Endrio, as many of you will know, is the establishment of a researcher council. This is a researcher-centric organization by mandate, and to assist in the governance of its role in the DRI ecosystem, and to ensure that it's relevant in its service delivery. There will be a researcher council. That researcher council is established by bylaw in Endrio, and that is a pivotal, important piece of work for us. We will have to articulate a strategic plan, as I mentioned earlier, that will incorporate the full national vision for the DRI ecosystem and pull together in an integrated fashion those ARC, DM, and research software activities, and base that on an understanding of what's happening now and user needs assessment. We have a series of backroom functions. Obviously, this will be a funding organization. We don't take this lightly, setting up a stable suite of backroom administrative functions that are very, very high standards to ensure that all the funding that's being endowed into this organization is managed in an appropriate fashion, and it passes high level audit test. And also, along the way here, we will need to emerge with a clear brand for this organization. Endrio is still a working title, but we will need to develop brand and communications mechanisms as we go. All of this strategy and everything that we're going to be doing as an organization is going to be built on a new service delivery and funding model. And that model will be developed in collaboration with the regions, host sites, and the other DRI partners. We're very, very committed to co-creating that model and to having experts in to assist us in developing that model, and to develop it based on a really, really detailed understanding of what's happening now in the DRI ecosystem across the country. We have an opportunity to develop and deliver some initial projects here. Our funder, ISED, and our community, all of you have indicated to us that, moving through a 2-year transition period without moving the yardsticks and making important investments on behalf of our researchers isn't going to be acceptable. So we have an opportunity to develop some initial projects, previously called pilot projects, and we'll be working on those. And we'll be developing a cybersecurity framework as well. Part of our commitment to our funder, to ISED, and likewise with Canary, commitment to the funder is to develop a joint DRI ecosystem plan. So this is a way of ensuring that Canary and Endrio are working towards broader end goals that, and there's no light between the organizations, and that we are sharing a commitment to supporting your institutions and the researchers that work in them in a seamless fashion. And, you know, to deliver on all of this, you know, very important set of transition activities. We have a commitment to develop, it's really 2 transition plans that need to be developed. We'll talk about those a little bit later. The overarching goal and the transition for us, we've made this commitment, we made it to you, and we made it to the researcher community, will continue, is to focus on 2 things: a continuity of service as we're moving through transition to the new model, and a focus on the staff that are working in the DRI ecosystem. There is over 200 staff that have been identified that are somehow working across the country in different relationships with their institutions. They are all pivotal in the delivery of the services that researchers are taking advantage of now. It would be very poor of us through this transition not to focus on that component of it and to ensure it's a pathway, clear pathway to retain and develop those HQP that are working in the system. You know, the transition activities, you know, these are not just paper exercises here. This is going to be active exercise of communications and connection with people. And we're, you know, our board is very committed to working with the boards and the other organizations, in particular Compute Canada, where the transition activities are somewhat more complicated than in the Canary side. And you know, we have a commitment at the management level between the organizations that are working in transition to stay well connected as well. This is all going to have to be supported by a very clear change management plan as well, because we're moving funding models, we're moving accountability, and we're shifting you know, some elements of the relationship of the HQP that need to be established over time. So there's a change element to this as well. So some transition activities, and I guess, you know, this last point here is a commitment we've made to ourselves and to the community here to ensure that we are, you know, fully engaged along the way here. That this is not a you know, an embryo built and delivered model here, but there is some co-creation in this, and there's some connection along the way, and that all of you as members, but the broader stakeholder community, are fully engaged. And you know, our board is seized to this as well, and you know, we have internally set up some board connections to guide stakeholder management, and we have a plan in place on that. So those are just some of the streams of work, and it's very hard to characterize. We've got a lot of activity going on, a number of different projects, a lot of work streams. We have an articulated work plan here. These are some of the key sort of elements of all of that. Very quickly here, I want to run through some of the accomplishments to date. This is important for us every once in a while to take stock of where we are in things. And you know, there's some of the accomplishments, even in this interim mode, have been considerable here. This first slide really takes us up to primarily up to the members meeting that many of you participated in March in Ottawa, which seems forever ago, right? In many ways, and in other ways, it seems like it was yesterday. I vaguely remember a wrestling tournament going on across the hall from us at our meeting, but you know, there's a lot of, as I said earlier, there's a lot of work that went into getting us to that point. But since that time, we've had a lot of developments as well. A lot of them have to do with engagement with some of the participants in this call and other organizations as well. So we have that work plan developed. I was talking about, I was summarizing, but many meetings along the way with regions and host sites, some direct meetings through the Compute Canada Federation with some of the staff, the HQP, working in this area. We have a really well-developed, remarkably well-developed suite of governance policies. Our committees are in place for our board. Our board has had 4 meetings and has formed up very, very quickly and is very active on the overall work plan and the agenda and the strategy for the organization. So the board that all of you voted on and put in place is really maturing and very, very active and has many of the governance structures that would give you comfort in place. We've had, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, we have had an active dialogue back and forth with ISET, our funders, on COVID-related timeline considerations here. So many of the plans we had in place were based on very aggressive timelines. Some of those have been compromised by our inability to connect, frankly, with some of our community. So this has consumed a fairly significant amount of our time as a team, and also our board's time is just understanding what we can do, how we can push those timelines back, the dependencies and other components of our work plan. And as I said, I'll talk about that a little bit further. Major development for us over the last several weeks, and many of you will have heard of this or will be very shortly, is we're doing our work up to establishing the Researcher Council. So our goal here is to have our nominations for Researcher Council in place for our AGM for you to vote on. And to facilitate that work, we pulled a team of researchers together, led by Guillaume Bourque, who many of you will know. 2 of our board members have been are on that group as well. And we really just pulled together, I think it's 6 or 7 individuals from across the country, just to guide the development of the nomination process for those board directors. And as I said, talk about that in a little while in more detail. A lot of work in that, and a lot of consideration went into putting together a governance model, a Researcher Council governance model and role that was taken out for consultation recently. I think we had over 100 participants in those consultations. Very, very good feedback, and also on the development of an application process for interested researchers. There is a CEO recruitment in progress here, and this has been a significant amount of work for a selection committee of the board, and obviously there's some support for that in terms of setting up a executive compensation comparison survey and those sorts of things. A lot of, as I said earlier, a lot of our backroom functions have been developed or in development right now, and a lot of this is in aid of making sure that when a CEO walks into the door here, that the foundation of the organization is in place for her or him to pick up and run with. We put in place in the interim team some key resources, the recruitment of an HR lead, very important for us, and also some subject matter analytical support, some people to help us with some of our business processes and our work planning activities. Many of you will have seen some announcements around the Carl Portage moving into Embryo, funding that organization, and also some associated funding commitments that we've made in the research data management space. We have navigated through a clean audit report from our KPMG auditors, and the proceeds of that are in our annual report if you're interested in it. And as I said, has been said earlier, that report has been delivered to ISET. So those are some accomplishments. Some near-term things that I think it's important for you to think about or focus on. The Researcher Council recruitment, we'll speak about that a little bit later. These initial projects, the pilot projects, we'll be developing a process around that and a review protocol. So we have a way of actually generating projects with input. So we're making sure that those projects that are being put on the table for funding are the right ones, and that they have been reviewed properly through an expert filter. we're planning for an AGM. Talk about that a little bit later. CEO recruitment. So something for you to watch, and there'll be some communications when that's ready from the board in the next several weeks, months. There is going to be a rather significant RFP hitting the street here, hopefully in the next short period of time. And that RFP will be focused on getting some
Romina, join the meeting.
Getting some consulting support in for the development of a new service delivery model. So this is sort of very, very key to the overall strategic plan and direction of the organization. And we'll talk about this a little bit later. And for all of you, very, very important for us to get your feedback on the membership development and the value proposition for members. So these are some near-term things just to keep an eye on and to to flag if you have any questions as they roll out. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because this gets rather complicated, but I guess what I would say around timelines, critical path for the organization is when we established our initial contribution agreement with ISED, we had very, very aggressive timelines built into it to get in place a multi-year funding proposal by December of this year. So December 2020 was when we initially committed to getting a multi-year funding proposal in place. That would have required us to have established and socialized, get buy-in to a new service delivery model for the suite of services. It would require a needs assessment being led by a researcher council to be in place. And it would have required us to have a foundational knowledge around the current state of activities. All of those things leading up to that multi-year funding request in December of 2020 required very, very intense engagement with our community. That engagement was compromised by our inability to connect in person and to develop workshops, and frankly, to focus attention on this activity relative to other more important things that were going on in the research world and the post-secondary world. So, this reality hit us and hit ISED, late March, early April, and we started to initiate a discussion around revised timelines. And I guess what I would say about all of this is there are some critical transition dates that govern what NDRIO is aiming for. And a lot of them have to do with the termination of existing funding models. So on this first slide, you'll see that the funding of the Carl Portage activity that was funded by Canary, and in October 2020, that still is the case. The next slide, the advanced research computing ARC expansion agreements that were focused on the host sites initially were to end April 2021, next year, and the permanent funding, the multi-year funding of NDRIO was to come in to support that activity over time. That timeline now has been changed to 2022 by ISED, and there is an interim funding approach that's being put in place for those host sites. The major science initiative, MSI funding for CFI still is slated to end in April of 2022, and the funding for Canary on all data management research software activities will end in April 2022 as well. So those deadlines, those transition milestones or funding changes, with the exception of the ARC expansion piece, all remain in place. But some of our planning activities within that are changing. So as I said, we were aiming towards a December 2020 multi-year funding proposal, strategic plan for the organization. ISET has communicated to us that they are agreeable to pushing that back by 1 year. So that will be that is now due in 2021, December 2021. And it gives us a 1 year period to do the work necessary to develop a strategic plan, put the funding models in place, et cetera, et cetera. But we still have that hard transition date of 2022. And there's a range of activities within all of that, completion of current state assessment, initiating and completing a needs assessment, all those sorts of things, development of transition plans. Some of those are shifting, but the big change I just wanted to highlight for members here is that the date of the big multi-year funding proposal is shifting back by a year. There will be another year of NDRIO funding, 1 year funding, which will include hopefully some programming, as well as just running the operation. And there will be agreements extended with the host sites for operations for the host site activities. Okay, I'm not gonna walk through specific dates here because it gets a little bit confusing here. We've recharted all of this. Our work plan is accommodating these timelines, and I think for the interim team and the board, this change is welcome, right? This gives us a little bit more breathing room, and it gives us a considerable amount of time to considerable extra amount of time to actually engage with all of you and the researcher community. Okay, the Researcher Council here. So a highlight of our work over the last little while, as I mentioned earlier, is really getting the work up in place for establishing this Researcher Council and getting a slate of researchers in place for your consideration at the AGM in September. So, as I not to reiterate this, but this is a foundational piece of NDRIO's work. We are a researcher-centric organization, and the council is baked into the bylaws of the organization. Mentioned earlier, we set up a 7-member multidisciplinary team led by Guillaume Bourque, and those, they have developed that governance model, and it's been released for community consultation just recently. The thing to focus on here in the next little while is around the nomination of researchers for that. And what we have said here, and we've made this commitment to you as members before, is there'll be 2 pathways for nominations to the Researcher Council. And I will remind everybody here that this is not a representative council. This is not about picking individuals to represent disciplines necessarily, et cetera, although diversity is a big part of what we're aiming for here. It's really to pull together a group of researchers that can work on behalf of the whole research enterprise in the country. So diversity in that is very, very important, but it's not about allocating seats for heavy users versus other disciplines and this sort of thing. So this is a difficult thing to communicate sometimes, what we're talking about here, the difference between diversity and representation. But it's really important as you're thinking about this going forward, that this is really about getting people on this Researcher Council that can think about the research enterprise nationally, as opposed to just from their discipline. So there'll be 2 pathways for nomination, right? There'll be an open call, and we've worked extensively on a sort of an application format for a form and process, and we've brought in some support for that work, some targeted HR support for that work. So open call, but also through primary members. So primary members are able to nominate as well. And that'll be a consideration that goes onto the board table, because ultimately the recommendations coming from this Researcher Advisory Council will go onto the full board table. There's a point on this slide around diversity again. So we're looking for people obviously that are somewhat versed in the ARC and research software and data management space. But also that sort of represent the geographic diversity of the country, linguistic, and also the research diversity as well. And you know, the researcher advisory group has been very focused on ensuring that there is a you know, there's a place in this for early researchers and also for those from the social sciences and humanities who maybe aren't as heavy a users as some of the services have been in the past, but are increasingly finding a space in the whole DRI ecosystem. So key on this slide here is to watch for an application process here. They'll be going out shortly. I don't think, Cynthia, it's gone out yet, but I think it'll be going out shortly, week of July 27th. So very, very shortly here. And we have a very tight timeline on this. The timelines have been quite compressed. So we'll be looking for nominations by Friday, August 14th. Okay, so this is, wanted to make sure that you as members are aware of this, and you will get targeted. You'll get a targeted a call through you as well. And you know, we're happy to talk through how you might want to handle it in your organization. We're looking for you actually as members to think about diversity and to think about that broader goal as you're thinking about nominating people from your own organization as well. Okay, boy, I'm talking a lot here. Let me just blast through the rest of this and then I'll pause for a minute. Earlier I touched on transition, right? So transition is a very, very significant part of what we're thinking about here, and it certainly is on ISED's mind as well. There's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of players, a lot of activities, a lot of history and construct in the way things are run right now. And transitioning to a new model is going to be very important for us. And there's a couple of plans that have been commissioned by ISED as part of our funding agreement, one led by Canary, and that has to do with the research data management activities and research software activities. And the due date of that plan is January 2021. And we've had good discussions with Canary about that plan as well, good open discussions. We have the lead on a plan to transition the ARC activities, and we are working with Compute Canada Federation on this and Compute Canada as an organization. And the deadline for that is now April 2021 for delivery of that. That's one of those timelines that's been shifted back slightly. Recently, our board, now this hasn't been announced formally yet, I don't believe, Peter, but our board has recently had an agreement with the Compute Canada board to set up some joint transition governance committee work. So a couple of reps from each of the boards will come together just to watch over the work of management in developing transition plans and the implementation of that, just to make sure that we've got very, very strong communications and collaboration across those two organizations, that we're not sending out any contradictory messages or, frankly, wasting effort on things for all of you and for people working in the ecosystem. We have a framework that guides our build and our transition activities that we've developed. I would say this is penultimate. We still will refine this as we go forward here, but basically, we have a set of considerations, activities along the side, and the major work streams. And the key thing here, and this is something our board asks for frequently, is to understand how various players, including members, including you and your institutions that you represent, are going to be engaged by ENDRIO going forward here. So you'll see across the top here some of our key key work streams, developing that current state assessment, the needs assessment, all the way through to transition planning and transition activities. And we have arrayed our contributors to all of those activities here. And, you know, in more detail, we have, you know, some assessment of where it needs to be more of a communications focus with contributors here, and where it is full co-creation and workshopping and working group activity across these things. So this is really just in aid of letting you all know that we have a framework that's guiding our build and our transition activities, and this is in aid of ensuring that we have the right focus on engagement with the full community going forward. So a bit of a touchstone for us. And we'll be, I think I mentioned earlier that our board is now seized of this issue as well, and we'll be having more discussion with them on this and making sure that this is an adequate approach. Let me just finish up with this. We're targeting our AGM. So this is our first AGM. The last one was just a general members meeting. First AGM, it'll be virtual, and we're targeting September the 24th. We're pulling together our agenda right now, and we'll be working with our board on that. We're thinking bringing in a guest speaker to that. And I think you'll be getting dial-in instructions to that as well. We're going to do run the same play as we did in our general meeting, simultaneous translation, and there'll be live voting for primary members along the way. We're interested in any feedback you may have, any thoughts you may have on our bylaws. There is some cleanup of bylaws. I think, without getting ahead of our board on this, I think there would probably be some bylaw changes that need to be made. We had some feedback through our first establishment of bylaws where you know, we need to clean up some language and maybe some other things as well. And certainly there'll be a vote on the researcher council at that. The board appointments themselves, I would just say, because the board is fresh from March, the terms of board members, nothing is expiring unless we get a resignation between now and September. There is no voting on additional board members. That'll be at the following year, I think, when some of the first terms come up. Okay, so just to set everybody's expectations clear. So if you can get, if there's any feedback on bylaws or any thoughts you have around the AGM, if you can get those to us by the end of the week, that August 7th point, that would be great. And you can email me directly or come in through the Engage DRI site as well. Okay, so Cynthia, do you want to pause here and take questions, or should we just roll through this and then do it at the end? Maybe we should keep rolling, eh? What do you think?
Yeah, why don't we keep rolling? We've got maybe just a handful of slides tied to member engagement, and then we will have a Q&A. I did want to just let people know as well that we will be posting both the recording of this session and the deck to our website. So I know some of those slides were a bit detailed. You'll have a chance to take a look at those in greater detail on our site.
By the way, I should, I don't know if all of you know Cynthia Goodwin is our communications lead for Andrea. I have that flaw of just assuming everybody knows everybody here, and I pass by introduction sometimes. So my apologies, Cynthia. So I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia now.
Well, thank you very much, George, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone, depending on where you are in Canada today. George, you can advance to the next slide. Thank you. So to echo my colleagues, thank you again to each of you for taking part as members in Endrio in our first year. You know, you're demonstrating great confidence in the organization, you know, and the mandate of Endrio, and for that, we're very, very grateful. As both George and Peter have said, member and stakeholder involvement and engagement are really a top priority for us. The principles are baked into not only our guiding principles as an organization, but in how we're setting everything up as we undertake our work plan and plan our work and our engagement strategies. So also, as George mentioned, we are currently developing a membership plan, that plan it'll be really important in that plan that we articulate our specific value proposition to the membership. We want to make sure that we're demonstrating real value in ways that are meaningful to you. To help us arrive at a meaningful plan, it will be important that we hear from you at the front end of plan development. So we want to hear your ideas about what is meaningful to you, how best to serve you, and how to best deepen your involvement in the organization as we grow. So there's lots of opportunity for us to co-create and to shape this together. So as mentioned, receiving your feedback will be important. We'll be designing surveys, for example, focus groups. We'll determine the best way to do that. But we welcome your thoughts on this call at any time. You can reach out to us at any time, but we thought we'd open it up with a couple of thought starter questions just to get the conversation rolling. And if you need a little more time to ponder some of these questions, that's okay as well. So George, why don't we go into the next slide? So again, we've got a couple of thought starter questions here. We've divided them into 4 parts. What I'd like for you to do, if you're interested in sharing some feedback at this point, you can certainly do so through the chat function. And I think everybody is aware of how to access that. It's just at the bottom of your Zoom window. You can see the chat function there. You can also, if you want to speak, because sometimes it is nice to kind of hear, as George mentioned, can be a little, hard maybe to be hearing just 1 or 2 voices during calls like this. So we certainly invite you to raise your hand if you would like the opportunity to elaborate on a piece of feedback or an idea. So to raise your hand, if you're not familiar with that piece of functionality, just go to participants. Again, at the very bottom of your Zoom window, if you click on participants, you'll get the pop-up window, and then over to the right-hand side at the bottom, you'll have the opportunity to raise your hand. So if you raise your hand, we'll be able to see that between Jay and I, and we'll, as time permits, we'll call on you to share your thoughts, by speaking today. So with that, and also, as I mentioned, you can just simply ponder the questions, because we realize that for some of these, you may need a little more time to think. Today is really about starting the process. So let's take a look at part 1. Part 1 is really centered on member value and involvement. So a couple questions here that we would invite you to consider. First one, how do you want to be involved with Andrea? What kind of a role do you want to play, with the organization? Certainly there's the act of being engaged, receiving information, coming to meetings. But if there's a deeper level of involvement that you're foreseeing, we'd love to hear about that. The second part here, the second question we'd love for you to consider, it's always good to take a look at other organizations, good and best practices at other organizations. If you are aware of other member-based organizations that do a great job involving members and demonstrating value, whether it's an organization that you're a part of or a colleague is part of currently or in the past, again, we'd love to hear about that. We'd love to have the opportunity to take a look at what these good or best practice organizations do, so that we can learn from their practices from a member relations and member engagement perspective. So if there's any feedback, if there are any thought starters that you'd like to share with us today, we'd welcome hearing that from you. If not, because these are big questions, certainly bring them away and know that we will be back in touch with you as we design our consultation process. And as we go, by the way, if you think of something that you want to raise, kind of a slide or 2 from now, don't be shy. Again, you can feel free to include or add a comment in chat or to raise your hand. So we're going to move into the second part. This one's a little more transactional in nature, so it might be a little easier to answer some of these questions. And I see someone did include a comment there, so we'll go back to that in a moment. So under part 2, engagement and communications, we actually have a poll. We're going to have to try something. We're going to experiment with some polling during the Zoom call today and see how we make out with that. So 2 questions. One of them is a 2-parter. First question here is, what is your preferred method of consultation? And then second question here is, what is your preferred method and frequency of communication? So let's start with the first poll, Jay, if you want to bring up the first poll, if you're able to pull it up. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Jay. So what is your preferred method of communication? Consultation, rather. So consultation. By consultation, we mean really the act of, again, we're seeking your feedback, you know, before or at the very beginning of a process to design a program or a practice or something, you know, that you know, we're going to be rolling out. So some of the answers here: paper review and submission by email. So an example of us having done that would be with a research or council governance model, for example. We had a paper with questions baked in. We shared it with people by email, invited feedback. I think we received you know, a little more than 25 submissions, for example, through that process. Webinars like this one with a feedback feature. We also use that again with a researcher council consultation process. We had a webinar in English and French and invited feedback through chat. Focus groups, let's say groups of up to 8 people with a moderator, either in person or virtual, would be another way to consult with members. Surveys, and then use of multiple methods. So sometimes it's nice to rely on a range of tools, and there could be things. There'll be, I'm sure, other things that we've not thought of. So if there are, just maybe reflect that under the other category. And I believe you can pick more than one of these things as well. You're not restricted. So if you'd like to just make your selection and submit, we'll maybe give a moment, and Jay, you'll be able to see what's come through.
Yeah, we have 40 people have replied out of 73.
Okay, well, that's fantastic. If you want to share the results with the group.
Okay, it's still coming in. Let's just wait for a few more seconds and then I can
Perfect.
how to share the results.
That's great. And I realize some people who are participating by phone, it's obviously, it's hard, you know, well, perhaps I'll do a general call out in a moment to see if there's any feedback that people on by phone want to share, knowing that obviously you're not able to take part in the.
Okay, I'm ending the poll, Cynthia, and let me share the results. Is that visible on your screen?
Yes, I can see it. I think everybody else can see it as well, and we'll have a record of this. So it shows a nice mix of preferred consultation methods, which is great, and with people really favoring multiple use, which does make a lot of sense. I see that there were some people who noted other. So for those who said other, perhaps in the chat you wouldn't mind letting us know what some of those other methods might look like for you. So thank you. This will actually be helpful for us as we design some of our future consultation. Let's go to the next question. What is your preferred method of communication? So Jay, the next poll.
Yep. Just cleaning up the screen. Oh yes, and trying to remember how to use this feature for the first time live.
All right, thank you, Jay. So what is your preferred method of communication? And of course, the best communication is two-way communication. But here we're really envisioning you know, methods for us to share information with you, key updates, etc. We currently use a number of different methods, and we'll be continuing to expand on our communications program. So some of those methods include email. You know, we use our cyber impact messages have been going out, you know, with a little bit of frequency lately. Our website, which will continue to improve, by the way. Social media, we are on LinkedIn. We have plans to start a Twitter account soon. A meeting of all members like this meeting. Smaller group meetings would be another option, presentations, etc. And again, there could be other channels and other methods as well. So we'll give you know, a few seconds here again for people to answer this question.
Yeah, we have 44 people that have answered. Thank you.
All right, Jay, so whenever you're ready, whenever you feel people are finished, you can show the answers.
Yeah, it's slowing down. Here we go.
Okay, interesting. This is great. So again, email, a popular channel with our members here on the call today. And again, with a nice mix of some other channels, with social media being a little lower on the list, which is very good to know. So that's great. And again, for those who selected other, perhaps in the chat, you might indicate what you have in mind for that, and that will be very helpful to us. So that's great. Thank you, Jay. We're going to do the third poll now, the third and final poll, which touches on the frequency of communication. All right, so this question asks, how often do you want to hear from us? And then the options here include weekly, monthly, every 2 months, quarterly, whenever there is important news to share. And that can vary depending on the nature of the news, and other. So this one is about frequency of communication. We want to make sure that we're communicating the right information at the right time. But certainly we want to be mindful that we're not flooding inboxes unnecessarily, for example, and we'll continue to make sure that we're really thoughtful with respect to how we package information. So Jay, again, let me know once it feels like the answers are starting to peter out.
Yep, I'll give a few more seconds. That's it. We've had typically about 52 for each.
Okay, interesting. That's great. So it looks like monthly, and it depends, of course, but the more popular responses look like monthly, and certainly whenever there is important news to share, and that can be varied, right? So thank you very much, everyone, for taking part in the poll. We certainly know that, that this is an experiment and to do a bit of a temperature check. We know we'll need to be a little more fulsome and thoughtful with respect to the engagement process on this and other matters. I'm going to take a quick look here at the chat to see if there are any questions. I see there are lots of comments, and thank you for those comments. Okay, I don't see any questions there, but again, thank you for the comments. We'll take a look at those after our meeting today. So we can go to the next slide, George. Okay, so part 3, as George mentioned earlier, Andrio does have a very defined mandate and deliverables as per our contribution agreement. Here's an opportunity to identify areas of potential incremental value related to our mandate that we can provide our members. So again, this piece will really require some thought. We know it will require a review of, again, good and best practices and conversation with our members. But if there are any thought starters you'd like to share today, any preliminary thoughts with respect to areas in which Andrio can provide additional value to members using the proceeds of annual member fees, we would love to hear some of those preliminary thoughts today. So feel free to include those in the chat, and you can certainly raise your hand at any time as well. And then part 4 is just any other feedback to share. If there's anything else that's been on your mind today or leading up to today from a feedback perspective that you'd like to share with us, by all means do so. You can do so here. You can do so as well by email at any time. Our email address will be noted at the end of this presentation. Also on our website, it's andrio-noirn@engagedri.ca. So again, it'll be on the deck, and it's in on our website. So please reach out to us at any time. We have a number of people who do monitor that account. Your email will be seen. So please feel free to use it. Okay. All right. I'm just looking to see here. I'm looking at the chat screen to see if there is any. Okay, perfect. Thank you for, again, those comments. We'll take a look at those after the call. So that is it with respect to our section on member engagement. George, if you want to move to the next slide, I think what we'll do is we'll kick off our Q&A. And I will moderate. So again, I'll take a look at the chat box supported by Jay, and then I can raise the question for George or others at Andrio to answer. Any questions about our presentation or material today, or anything else related to the organization that you'd like to ask today?
It's Martin Taylor, Cynthia.
Oh yes, okay, go ahead, Martin.
So George, with regard to the 12-month delay for the ISED timeline, what implications does that have for the 375 million? Is that being extended by a year with additional funding?
Well, sorry, who is speaking? Just so I know.
It's Martin Taylor from CRDCN.
Hi, Martin. Thanks for the question. Yeah, there's been no discussion about increasing the envelope at this point in time. I think the question around the end date, there has been some initial discussions with ISED around extending the overall program by a year to end in 2025, I guess, Martin. We haven't landed on that yet because we have wanted to map out the current activities on an annual basis just to make sure that we're not at risk of underfunding anything if we do that. But it's a good question. It's a live discussion with ISED, and it may there may be an extension to the overall program depending on where we land on that sort of analysis. But as I said, really hasn't been any discussion around increasing the overall envelope here.
Okay.
And Michael Roney has his hand up.
Yes, I had a question.
Oh, sorry, I hit mute at the same, unmute is at the same time you hit mute. Go ahead, Michael.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
No, I had a question about the nomination procedure for the researcher council. Now, in the bylaws, it states that the primary members are entitled to nominate. And in your slides, you mentioned there were two ways: nomination through the primary members and then applications from, I guess, individuals. And my question is, can associate members also nominate? It's not forbidden in the bylaws, but it would be useful for associate members to also nominate individuals rather than have the individual go to the individual and tell them to apply. Because we can actually provide arguments as to why particular individuals should be considered by the research advisory group.
Well, we hadn't contemplated that. It's Michael, right? Michael, I'm speaking to.
Yes,
We hadn't contemplated reaching out to associate members for nominations. But I can take that back to the research advisory group and get some guidance from them on how they want to handle it. But we've been very clear right from the constitution of Andrio that members would be primary members would be given an opportunity to consider nominations to that and have have those put on the table with the board of directors. So that the associate member nomination piece has not been part of our thinking right now, but I certainly will take that back to the researcher advisory group and let them know that you asked the question and get their thoughts on that.
I mean, the advantage is that some of our institutes, like the Institute of Particle Physics is where I represent, we have people from across the country, across different universities, and we could nominate a number of people that the board then can consider and select one of them or something. But we can also give information about those individuals so they'll have an informed understanding what they're going to be getting with these different individuals. It also provides the ability for us to, give a diverse set of individuals that can use in different ways.
Yeah, we have. I mean, there has been a discussion around the use, how to communicate through those disciplinary organizations, whether or not they're associate members or not. So let me circle back with the researcher advisory group on that and put that on the table with them and make sure they understand that there's an opportunity there.
So, I mean, the thing that I wanted to understand is this idea of an application process. What does that even mean? because you in your slide, I think it was around slide 21 or 22.
Yeah,
So there was
yeah.
two prong. It just seems strange that individuals can apply, but associate members can't nominate.
Yeah, well, the actual application, right? I mean, that's a form to fill in the details of who's, who's bringing, what names are being brought forward and what the particulars are. So there's, CV type information and research information and geographic information in that application form. So that'll apply notwithstanding whether the name comes up through the use of that form. So we have standard information on each of the people applying will be used notwithstanding whether it comes directly from a community member or whether it comes up through nomination. So the application form is sort of a standard, it's an HR type of thing, right? If you think of it that way. Sorry, let me go do your question again here because I kind of lost track.
Yeah, I mean, so the point is that we can get our people, we're already putting together a list of people we'd like to have considered for the Researcher Council. Mm-hmm. They would put in one of these applications, but I think it would be valuable to the Researcher Advisory Group to also get a statement from, from the community of researchers in that area explaining that these people are not just applying on their own, but they've got the support of the broader community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And right now that's not, there's nowhere in the process that allows for that. The primary members have to be universities, okay? And, you're losing the associate members that have, connections across the country and across university boundaries.
Yeah, yeah. Well, our the goal, I mean, these are good points, right? And I will take them back to the Researcher Advisor Group and we can have an offline discussion on this if you choose. The goal here is really to get a diverse slate of candidates, right, that are representative of a number of different research fields and disciplines and stages of research, right, in their careers. So, how we generate those applications, we can discuss that. It was very important for us, though, for primary members, as we were constituting NDRIO and establishing our membership, that part of the value of being a member is that there is an opportunity, and membership comes with a fairly significant financial contribution to this organization, which is a signal of commitment. But for our board and for the organization, it was important for us to make sure that they had an opportunity to nominate people to the Researcher Council, to put those names forward to the board. Ultimately, it's our board that will use a matrix type of approach and analysis guided by this Researcher Advisory Group to recommend a slate to the AGM. So how we generate those names and those sorts of things, I can take that back, but the overarching goal here is to get a diverse slate of people to represent, not a discipline, but to represent the researcher community overall. Okay, so we can take that offline and I'm happy to have more discussion with you on that.
Okay.
So thank you for your question, Michael. There are a couple of other questions as well here in chat that relate to the Researcher Council, and maybe some of them you've already answered partially, George, but one of them does speak to or asks, how will primary member nominations to the Researcher Council be treated relative to responses to the open call and or associate member nominations if accepted? And it could be, again, if we're bringing back the idea or the question as relates to associate membership and their participation in that nomination, it may require, again, a response from the Researcher Advisory Group. But is there anything else that you'd like to say on that before we move to another question?
No, I think the treatment, the process and the treatment for open call versus nominations from members, that'll be articulated in the communications that go out. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so we'll, there'll be some more information coming out on that shortly.
Yes, and Andrew Barker, in response to your question about the selection of Researcher Council members, we'll make sure that we communicate, we expand on that piece as well. Judith Chadwick had a question. Could you say more about the RFP for new service delivery model development?
Right. So the overarching goal for Endrio is to develop a new model, right? A new service model for national services and for regional and institutional services as well. It meets some funding thresholds that the funder ISET has given us. So there's sort of new matching ratios and those sorts of things. And later on in this deck, which we will post, there's we go over some of that again, right? The under the CFI model, there was a ratio of 40% CFI funded, 60% from provinces and territories for these activities, project by project. That ratio is shifting, and there's a to 60% being funded by the federal government, but still some requirements for matching from provinces and territories, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a funding model that we need to develop to meet those goals set by the funder, the federal government, and we need to articulate what services are going to be delivered on a national platform, how they're going to be delivered, how they're going to be funded, and what the respective roles are of the various players. So that work will be built on, an understanding, as I said earlier, of the current state, and the current state assessment is being completed hopefully in September. Bringing that to ground, and then we will initiate a needs assessment led by the Researcher Council. That work will all have to feed into a new service model and funding model. So we are going to the street to get some consulting help in for to provide analytical support and to develop the models and to facilitate consultation and working groups with the community, right? So this new new service delivery model and funding model will drive our request for multi-year funding. It'll articulate how Endrio is going to fund things, what they're going to fund in the community, and it'll drive the development of a strategic plan for the organization. So it's a very, very important big piece of work. And we need to make sure that work is, as I said, it's a bit of a co-creation piece. There's going to need to be lots of engagement with all of you and the existing players, but it'll need to be guided by some expert consulting help and some expert advisors along the way. So that's what that RFP is about.
Right. Another question as relates to the Researcher Council, and it's about time commitment from Anne Martel. What time commitment is required or anticipated from members of the Researcher Council? And Scott Dellinger shares the comment that the time commitment of Researcher Council members is required before nominations.
Yeah, there has been a discussion at the Research Advisory Group on this. I think, and I just can't remember here. We can follow up with specifics on this, and certainly we can communicate expectations here. I think there's going to be. I'm not going to be precise in my answer because I can't be, but I would say in the early days of this, as it's forming up, is going to be a considerable amount of time, right? Because there's going to need to be some work of the Researcher Advisory Group on understanding the terms of reference and boundary conditions and the connections with management and the board, how that's going to work. So I would say, like many things that are forming up here, there'll be an intense period, I would say, probably for the first six months of work. And on top of all of that, just the forming up, we're going to be asking them to initiate a needs assessment exercise as well, right? So I would say fairly intense piece of work, and we will need a commitment. I think we're aiming for 20. I don't know if we landed on the specific number, but it'd be around 20 people, I think, for this. But this is going to be a requirement to roll up sleeves and do some work here through the fall and into the early winter. So sorry, I can't be precise, but we can follow up with that.
Yeah. Okay. So from Karina McInnes, Endrio is providing funding to the World Data Systems International Technology Office, hosted by Ocean Networks Canada at the University of Victoria. Was there a call for proposals or process governing this activity? And will there be other similar requests for funding proposals?
Yeah, this was a connected to the funding of the Carl Portage function and some advice we got from Research Data Canada around the importance of making an early investment in this, and this was a bit of a foothold in into the international space for us. So I really relied on the advice of some experts in those realms. I would anticipate there'll be more opportunities like this going forward for NDRIO as our programs form up. And the one thing, we've had some questions on this funding announcement now since it came out a few weeks ago on the process we used. This was connected with our transition activities of research data management. This is not the way we're going to be seeing funding in the future for NDRIO. We are committed to open and transparent processes and expert review in all cases. So any funding programs that are put in place will all be accompanied by very transparent review processes going forward. And this one was one of the early strategic decisions we took as part of that transition over some of the research data management functions. And I think the interest people have had in the decision-making process and how we went about it is a signal that people are looking for more opportunity to be engaged and for an understanding of what the review processes are going forward. So, yeah, I'm not sure that really answers the question other than to stay tuned as our programs start to develop. I don't know what area you work in or whether the question was general, but there will be certainly in the research data management space and research software space, there will be there's lots of work that is going to be undertaken to sort of develop the programming of NDRIO.
Thank you, George. And again, I'm reading chronologically here in the chat room. So Andrew Barker, I just wanted to let you know that we saw your comment and question about adding reference and support letters to the Researcher Council application. We'll take that back to the group. Benoit Pirenne has a question here, George. It's so large research infrastructure operators such as CLS, ONC, SNOLAB, Triumph, etc., are going to be important users of NDRIO services. How are they going to be represented through the Researcher Council? The research infrastructure operators are typically not researchers, but they provide services to their research community. And so the comment here is that as such, they are like NDRIO and Canary, while they rest on the NDRIO and Canary services to deliver on their own services. Can we make sure that these organizations representing billions of research dollars and ensuring Canada's international status in research are well represented in NDRIO?
Yeah, so one of the things, and I was just sort of thinking about this as I was answering one of the previous questions. It's really important not to for us not to over pressurize the Researcher Council establishment and the role of the Researcher Council, because one of their primary roles is going to be connecting with the broader researcher community, and that includes a deep connection with the heavy user organizations, right? So we are acutely aware that that many of the big research activities being carried out in the country are highly dependent on the structures and the processes that are in place now and the capacity that we have, right? So, I think we will make sure that as that Researcher Council is set up and starting to operate, that they are focused through the needs assessment work and on a regular basis with connecting with all those heavy users. And, I think continuity, ensuring that none of our major research platforms that are internationally connected are compromised along the way, and that as we're building out NDRIO, that we're actually providing additional capacity for that kind of activity. Right? So again, not a precise answer at this point because we haven't engineered the mechanisms to engage with those big platforms, but that will be part of what the Research Council is responsible for doing. And it'll be a big part of what management does in the development and delivery of the new programs for NDRIO.
there any final questions?
That's
Okay,
enough. That's enough, please.
we have one more slide, George, just to wrap up and a recap of some of the key dates coming up as a reminder for members.
Right. So just a couple, I guess, three dates here to consider here. If you have any feedback on the bylaws or, and I guess early, you know, if there's any, if anybody wants to get into an exchange around the researcher council, any more questions on that, you know, bring those in shortly as well, if you can, for us. So any thoughts on the bylaws leading into the AGM? Research Council nominations, the applications are going to be due August 14th. And as I said, if you have any questions or thoughts on that, let me know, let us know. Please mark in your calendars the September 24th virtual meeting. Are we talking morning or afternoon? We don't know yet, Cynthia, that?
Yeah, so right now we're thinking afternoon Eastern time,
Okay.
still to come.
Right. Okay. And there's a couple of things here that we've got listed here as possible points for another meeting, a members meeting here, just to review some of the work that that's in development here. The current state assessment, which we're trying to wrap up, will probably be late September, early October. But it would be good for us to, I think, present to members what we found there in a review of the system, and likewise that researcher needs assessment when that is undertaken by the Researcher Council and management of NDRIO, coming back and having a thorough discussion and presentation to members on that at the end of December. And there may be some other points along the way there as well. So 3 key dates there for your consideration, some feedback to us, and a couple of other things sort of for longer term thoughts to get on the agenda with members going forward. Okay, so listen, I want to just thank, are we done, Cynthia? Are we okay here? Okay.
Yes.
So let me just thank everybody for participating in this. So we covered a lot, right? I mean, there was a lot of material we covered there today, and I have a feeling that I inflicted a bit of a fire hose treatment on everybody. So my apologies. So we could have probably taken any one of these elements and spent an hour working through them. I really appreciate the questions and feedback too. I mean, some of these things, as you can tell from my answers, are in development, right? So the key thing for us is to hear from you, right? And, you know, any of these things that you're thinking about with respect to the Researcher Council or model development or strategic planning, any questions, really, really important that you give us feedback as we go here. We're very active here, and we're very committed to engaging with all of you and the broader community. We've done a lot of that, but you know, there still is a risk that we're not being as open and transparent as we should be, and to meet your expectations. So let us know, please. Very, very important. Here's where you can get in touch with me and the team here, and we turn around responses to these things very, very quickly. So on that note, I'm just going to, if I may, I don't know if Peter's still on the line, but I just wanted to see if Peter had any final remarks.
Oh, thank you very much, George. Listen, I followed the meeting very, very closely, and I thought it worked well. Meetings like this can be a bit unpredictable, but I thought the high level of participation on the pre-planned questions and the question period in the last half hour, I think they illustrated the value of the meeting and, of course, the importance of member engagement. So I thought, well done to everyone online.
Okay, so having heard that from Peter, I want to thank everybody here, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you soon. And if not, we will, I guess we'll see you all virtually in September. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. I'll be ending the meeting right now.